All right, so here's my case for ending the lockdown as is. Two immediate caveats for everyone who's just going to read the title and freak out. One, the priority we need to have, and I do have, and I think we should have, is how do we save the most amount of lives? So that's the argument I'm going to be making, is from the perspective of how do we save the most amount of lives. Number two, I am not advocating for a full end to the lockdown as is. Everyone go out to the movies, get the NHL back on, like 20,000 people in stadiums. That is not what I'm advocating for. I am talking about a selective opening up of different parts of the country in order to mitigate against a much, much worse disaster than what COVID-19 could be, just in terms of pure, disease and fatality rates off of ventilators and such. So we've been locked down for over a month now. And we've taken every measure in the book, both Canada, United States, and all over, to sort of, giving out thousands of dollars to just people willy-nilly. All these emergency measures, like borrowing against our debt, slashing interest rates to nothing. The interest rates can't go any lower. We can't keep handing out free money forever because the money has to come from somewhere. Like, what's the case against universal basic income? Why don't you just lay your money? Just cut people's taxes by $1,000 a month then. And cut out the bureaucracy. You'd make more money saving money that way. Okay. But what we need to talk about, though, is saving the most amount of lives. And I'm from Toronto, okay? So I want to get out, but I am more than willing to compromise and say that Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, those aren't the places that should be opening up right now, right? Because higher population densities, that's where the virus is. I'm not, this COVID-19 made up. It's 5G from Bill Gates to force vaccines. No. It's the 5G maps and the COVID maps are population density maps. That's why New York is the hardest hit. Very dense population. Okay. So I'm understanding of the fact that Toronto can't be opened up nearly as quickly as rural Saskatchewan, but we should be opening up rural Saskatchewan because it's a multi-layered argument here. We all sort of know, and most medical experts agree, that there is a second wave coming, right? And this is why we kind of talk about flattening the curve. And flattening the curve has sort of been parroted as sort of a mantra every time you celebrity get on the TV. Come on, I'm Miss Yvonne sings a song, and we need to flatten the curve because no one's paid attention to me for almost 3 weeks, okay? No one really knows what it means, but the reason we flatten the curve is to not overwhelm the healthcare system. It's not a cure, right? So we've sort of initially locked down, but we're going to get a second wave. Now, long-term flattening the curve, what does that look like? So here's what I'm proposing. A way to sort of flatten the curve long-term, if we want to avoid this problem, is we need to sort of tranche people back into the work environment in lower-risk areas, lower-risk people in lower-risk areas, right? We absolutely know the disease, thankfully, is not fatal to young people. It's not like H1N1, which was, killing lots of young and old people, and old people are actually more immune to it because they had antibodies left over from the Spanish flu. Like, no. This is a disease that if you get it and you're under 45 and you're healthy, you have a very, very good chance of surviving. You get it at the age of 80, it can be very deadly. Okay, so it kind of acts in concordance with most other diseases, which is brutal. So I'm not saying open up the economy, take grandma for a walk, get rid of the weak. We'll cull the weak and then be able to move forward because overpopulation is no. I think that's an abhorrent ideology. But what we need to realize is there's many different ways people can die in a pandemic. And one of the biggest ways people will die is an ancillary famine. Okay? Because someone needs to be working. Someone needs to be growing food. Someone needs to be processing the food. Someone needs to be shipping the food, right? You want Starbucks to reopen and get a latte and be like, oh, everyone needs to be locked down. Like, okay, except the person who delivers you your food, right? Except the person who picks the beans, the dairy farms, people coming in. I mean, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance people have towards, no, we just need to stay locked down forever. Like, if we stay locked down forever, there's we still need people to keep the supply chains open so we can continue to survive. Like, we're kind of running on fumes here. We're kicking this can down the end of the line, and the end of the line isn't that far away. The other thing is, we're in for an earthquake economically. Again, I said we've pulled out all the stops. Interest rates are nothing, okay? They've cut them to zero. There's no interest rates. We've borrowed against all our debt. We've exhausted the piggy banks, used all the reserves. Canada even had no reserves going in, which is such a big problem with Trudeau's massive spending. But America too, we've sort of all kicked out reserves. We've pushed it as far as we can. We've sort of tied things together. The earthquake we're facing is going to be massive, and it will hit in a couple months. Essentially, think of it this way. I mean, the hypothetical fault line is cracked, right? And then it ripples out there, right? And then it hits California and it goes into the ocean. We're at the point where the fault line is cracked. The ground hasn't started shaking in California yet, but the seismic waves are coming. And we need to do whatever we can to mitigate this. So again, I'm talking about saving as many lives as possible because, one, famine will kill a lot more people than COVID-19 ever could on its own. And we do need people to be working and farming and keeping the supply chains open. And two, I said this before, if we are going to have a second wave, which most medical experts think is likely, it happened during SARS, there was a second wave here, then if we stay locked down forever, one, I mean, the medical experts aren't even looking at the economic impacts and the famine. They're just looking at pure disease and pathology numbers, which is fine. But they all agree that a second wave is coming. And if we stay locked down in the summer and we get that second wave, fall, winter, when the weather's cooler and higher risk for these people, flu season again, right, you could have an even more catastrophic second wave. You don't want the second wave to sort of spike, right? We want to flatten the curve, which means if we're going to face a second wave, why not fight this battle on our terms instead of the disease's terms? We're hitting the optimal time when it comes to May, when the weather starts getting warm, it gets a bit nicer, where we can start tranching low-risk people in low-risk areas back to work. I'm not saying everyone open up the movie theaters. I'm not saying let's get the NHL back on the road. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying don't travel in between provinces and states and all that. But, I mean, yes, I'm not full shutdown, but 14 days of quarantine, whatever. But areas that maybe open up, say, okay, if we're opening up this area, maybe don't travel outside of it. And this is the problem of centralized control, and this is the good thing of federalism in the United States. It'd be great if we can get, most of Saskatchewan, we keep Saskatoon and Regina maybe a bit more cautious but nowhere near as Toronto. We have to treat all these areas different because they're different. But rural Saskatchewan, rural Alberta, rural Manitoba, these are the places that, we can start opening up the economy because there's two things we need to do. We need to keep the supply chains going, and we need to mitigate that economic earthquake that is coming. And the third thing is this is possibly flattening the curve. Yes, if people are going to be getting it, we should hope that maybe the low-risk people can get it, maybe and build up some type of herd immunities. Now, we're not sure if the disease is primarily death by, either cytokine storms, which is immune responses, or if it is sort of respiratory failure, which can sort of stack if you get it again. And that will be a subject for another video of how do we determine these two things and what's probably the best way to determine it and go forward, which I don't think any government is really doing seriously. This is what we need to do. So, I mean, there's three things that are on. One, we should tranche people back to work in selective areas. Okay, I would still be locked down because I'm in Toronto, but we need to mitigate the economic earthquake that is coming. All right, we need to keep the supply chains moving, or else we're going to die of famine, which would kill more people than the disease ever could. And we need to flatten the curve. And a long-term solution isn't quarantine till everything's good, then bring everyone out of quarantine, because then it's going to spike back up again. So, I mean, the way you flatten the curve is to sort of tranche people in low-risk areas back to work. We keep the nursing homes locked down. We keep the high-risk people locked down. If you have an autoimmune disorder, you're immunocompromised, stay home. If you have a close family member you're living with, stay home. But people living with other low-risk people or by themselves who are low-risk themselves, we should start to tranche them back into society very soon, because these three issues that I've talked about will end up killing a lot more people than just the 50,000 in the United States that have gone so far. People need food to live. And if you have famine, economic disaster, and you have a massive spike later on, more people are going to die unless we do this responsibly. So the fact that no one really is talking about this in the media, and I'm okay with them not saying this is the solution, but I mean, everything I see is just towards this is why we need to be locked in. Stay here, stay here, stay here. We need to at least see the debate of what I'm bringing up of, okay, we've been locked down for over a month. Now the equation has shifted. I was in favor of lockdown for a month when it first started, yet we need to flatten the curve. I was all about that. I'm not bashing that, reopening. This isn't fake news, a fake virus by the WHO to globalism, blah, blah, blah. None of that. But a month and later, the equation changes to mitigate the loss of life. And I don't see anyone talking about that seriously right now in the media or in our government. And I find that highly disturbing. So I'm going to do a video tomorrow probably on either the cytokine storm or the respiratory failure and what we should do and how we should be trying to solve this disease. Because I don't see I don't see anything from our government, and I don't see anything in our media. So stay tuned for tomorrow's episode.